Cuba, in this section of the continental shelf, there are supposed to be around 20 billion barrels of oil. The figure that the US have for this reserve is completely different. They're talking about 5 billion barrels. So there's a big difference there.
So today we'll be discussing the president of Cuba, who has recently made a visit of state to France, with some saying that French are looking to invest in the island. So what was the geopolitical relevance of this visit, and what economic sectors do you think France is interested in?
Well, thank you for having me again. The visit of President Castro to France is very relevant. You have to take into account that this is the first visit of state that President of Cuba has done since the Cuban Revolution back in the 50s. Fidel Castro was visited Paris back in the 90s, but this was in the framework of a UNESCO meeting, so the relevance of this meeting is high. You have to take into account that Cuba and France have a special relation. France has promoted the end of the US embargo and has also played a central role in the Club of Paris for giving a lot of money to Cuba in debt and interest. So the relevance and the relation is very important. You can also tell by the fact that François Hollande was the first president from Europe that visited Cuba back in May 2015. And this brings us to the sectors of the economy that might be of interest for the French companies. After the visit of François Hollande, the Cuban television reported that the French oil company Total was signing a contract with the Cuban oil company for the exploration and eventually exploitation of offshore oil. So this is definitely one of the main sectors that the Cuban economy has to offer to the Western investments.
So taking a look at the focus of Cuba and the maritime areas, in particular the Gulf of Mexico, where can Cuba legally grant offshore oil permits? And can we also take into consideration the conflict between Cuba and the United States?
That's definitely a very relevant question for this issue. You have to take into account that companies do fear to invest in places where the legal status is uncertain. We have a map of the Gulf of Mexico here. The limitation, this question has to be taken into account in two different parts. One is multilateral, the second one is bilateral. From the bilateral perspective, it relates to the delimitation of the maritime areas between Cuba and Mexico and between Cuba and the US. Cuba and Mexico, they have an agreement, international treaty back from the 70s, and it's in force and everything has been clear. Between Cuba and the US, the situation is, of course, a little bit different. They do have an agreement, the delimitation, maritime delimitation agreement from the 70s, but the issue is, due to the relation they have, the political relation they have, that agreement is not enforced. It is just applied provisionally with a two-year renewal. Every 2 years it is renewed provisionally. So it has been going on for a while now, back from the 70s. So that's for the bilateral part. For the multilateral perspective, you have to make reference to this part, which is the Eastern Gap. It's called the Eastern Gap, which is an area beyond the 200 nautical miles that the United Conventions on the Law of the Sea grants for coastal states. Mexico and Cuba are part of United Convention of the Law of the Sea, and they have to go through a process to claim that part. The US is not part of the convention. However, whatever comes out of the UN decision, both countries, Mexico and Cuba, they have to prove that their continental shelf goes beyond the 200 nautical miles. But whatever comes out of this international process will definitely have to go, after that, we'll have to go through a delimitation, bilateral or trilateral delimitations. So basically what we're talking about is that Mexico, Cuba, and the US will have to sit together and discuss and negotiate a maritime delimitation in that area.
So following the previous US and Cuba relations, what is the offshore oil perspective and what's the future investments for the offshore oil areas?
Well, previous to the actual state of relations between Cuba and the US, there were several companies that had already investment in offshore exploration in Cuba. Of course, we're talking about companies from countries or companies that did not fear the US sanctions. We're talking about PDVSA from Venezuela, we're talking about China, a company from China, a company, Petrobras from Brazil, which is very interesting. But you were also talking about, you're talking about Russia as well, but you were also talking about some European companies like from Spain and from Norway. That was, all the investment from those companies was directed to the western part of the continental shelf of Cuba. Why? Because according to Cuba, in this section of the continental shelf, there are supposed to be around 20 billion barrels of oil. The figure that the US have for this reserve is completely different. They're talking about 5 billion barrels. So there's a big difference there. What is Cuba expecting? Well, first of all, they are trying to get rid of their dependence of oil import, mainly from Venezuela. However, and they're aiming at getting a much needed international currency. However, they're going to be facing several problems. First of all, of course, is the oil price and how this oil price affects the eventual investors in offshore exploration. So basically, Cuba is going to also have to deal with the fact of human rights issues to be taken into account for foreign investment. But the future looks very good. I just heard today that probably President Barack Obama is planning a visit to Cuba this year. So yeah, future looks bright.
Who knows? Well, thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's all from myself and Nicolas, but for all the latest Dukascopy updates and interviews, do keep clicking back. Goodbye for now.